We are now at the end of China's technological rise. And the question now is, how fast is the fall?
China now unable to import the equipment to make semiconductors, or the tools to maintain and operate the equipment, or the software that's necessary to operate the equipment, or any mid or high-level chips at all. Now, any Americans who want to assist with the Chinese semiconductor industry have to make a choice. You can have your job with China, or you can have your citizenship. As a result, within about 48 hours of the policy being adopted last Friday, every single American citizen who was working in China in the industry either quit or their companies relocated their entire division so they wouldn't have to lose their staff. For all practical purposes, the Chinese semiconductor industry of everything over like Internet of Things level of quality is now dead. And that has a lot more implications than it sounds. The Chinese have proven incapable over the last 25 years of advancing sufficiently technologically in terms of the intellectual heft that's required to operate this industry beyond being able to simply operate the facilities that make the low-end chips, and even that had to be managed by foreigners. So there is no indigenous capacity here to pick this up and move on. And since the United States has basically corralled the Japanese and the Dutch, two very pro-American countries from a strategic sense, to join in this ban, really all that's left is potentially Korea and Taiwan. And even if they were fully on board, which they're not, that is not enough to carry all the water that needs to be carried. In terms of industrial follow-on, this doesn't just mean that the Chinese are never going to be able to make the chips that go into cars or computers. It also means that any industry that is dependent upon the hardware dies. So when you think of some of the technological advancement that the Chinese have made in recent years, things like AI and mass automation, monitoring their own population, the Great Firewall, hypersonic cruise missiles, a space program, supercomputers. If the Chinese want to do any of this, they have to buy chips basically on the gray market, purchase pre-finished products, and then pull out the chips and apply them to something they weren't designed for. We are looking at least an order of magnitude drop in the Chinese capacity to operate in anything that is tech-focused. This is a deal killer, not just for the industry, but for a modern technocratic system. From a technological point of view, China is done. The question, of course, is what do they do about it? We are dealing with a one-man government here that's a little petulant when they don't get their way, and where the bureaucracy is either completely static or over-enthusiastic and does things like wolf warrior diplomacy. So I would expect this kind of bag-of-dicks diplomacy that has evolved in China to get this hard and loud, which will probably only encourage the Americans to act more harshly and start targeting some of the lower-end semiconductors. And that's going to have consequences throughout the world, but we'll get to that another time.
The Biden administration has drastically decreased the level of access that the Chinese semiconductor firms can have to American technology. Now, there's this general belief around the world that China is the world technological superpower, and it is able to cut off supplies of pretty much everything to the rest of the world whenever it wants, and that is unmitigated bullshit. There are three types of semiconductors. There's the high end that go into your cell phones, your servers, satellites, power management systems. Those exclusively come from places like Taiwan, Korea, Japan, and the United States. And contrary to most people's beliefs, over half of all chips made in the world by value actually originate within the United States. And almost all of the chips that are manufactured in Taiwan are not designed there. They're also designed in the United States. So there's no danger whatsoever in the high end from a embargo sort of situation. Second, you have the mid-range chips that are in aerospace, automotive, and maybe the power control systems for your thermostat and your house. Those are Malaysia and Thailand, and those are also not made in China at all. What is going on with these new restrictions is the Chinese are now no longer able to import any of the chips of those two tiers unless they get a special dispensation. The third type of chips is your Internet of Things. Not your smartwatch, your dumb watch, like your little digital Casio watch, if you remember those. This is your digital calculator, perhaps. Your smart refrigerator that keeps track of your grocery list. Things like that. Those are, yes, almost exclusively made in China. Now, what Biden has done is not just say that the Chinese can't purchase the high and the mid-grade. They're also saying they can't purchase any of the equipment that's necessary to make the high and the mid-grade to make sure that they never move up to that quality step. And there are now increasing steps that the Chinese cannot buy the tools that are necessary to operate what equipment they have for the low grade. And we are very close to the Biden administration saying that the Chinese can't even import the equipment that they need to make the low grade, and they are incapable of making that themselves. It's not like this is a hammer. There's an ecosystem of stuff that is required to build, install, operate, and maintain any of the equipment, even on the low end. And the Chinese cannot do any of it without 100% imported expertise and equipment. That is now what the Biden administration is going after. So where does this take us? Well, assuming we have no interruptions to the supply chains for the materials, that's a different topic. We are looking at China perhaps being melon scooped out of all global semiconductors over the course of the next 2 to 3 years. And that's just the start of the Chinese problem, because the Chinese used to import the medium and the high quality products in order to build products and in order to do research. So I'm sure you've all heard about how the Chinese excel at things like hypersonics or artificial intelligence and automation. They do the brain work by using the high-end chips then putting in their own software. If you can't get the high-end chips, then those entire industries shrivel on the vine and go away. So more than anything that has happened in the world at this point, this new step of restrictions threaten to throw the Chinese into a technological winter. And any concerns you have about China in its rise can be killed just by that. And that's before you consider energy or food or political dysfunction, or the Ukraine war, or demographics, all of which are capable of killing China without any help from the others.
As you all are well aware, we are facing a severe shortage of semiconductors for pretty much every industry right now, with the exception of personal electronics. None of us went out and bought cars. None of us went out and bought fridges. We all bought new phones and new iPads and new computers. So all of the semiconductor fabs around the world retooled to maximize their output for those particular product classes. And now we need to retool back for everything else that we use semiconductors for, which is pretty much everything. The industry that is hit the most by this is automotive. There's on average over $1,000 worth of microchips in every car, and the more advanced the car, the more you got. Teslas are practically built out of things. Semiconductors are not like any other manufacturing. In any other place, you're going to have all kinds of small and medium-sized businesses who are building all kinds of components, and then those are put together into larger components and ultimately assembled into the end product. It doesn't work that way with semiconductors. With the standard system, if one small company retools or goes out of business, someone else can step in and pick up the slack, or a new firm will form. But with semiconductors, it's all clean room work. And so it all has to be done in the same physical location. So they take the silicon powder, they melt it into a liquid, they draw that liquid into a crystal, they slice that crystal into wafer discs, they then etch the discs, dope the discs, bake the discs, break them apart, and ultimately assemble them into whatever the intermediate product is, all under one roof. That process from start to finish takes 6 to 9 months based on the degree of complexity of the semiconductor. So when the semiconductor fab started switching back 6 months ago, we're only now getting the first runs from that hitting the market. And it's going to be another 2 to 4 months before those first ones ultimately make them into final products that you can purchase. So you're really talking ultimately about a 9 to 12 month lag. Okay, we will get through this. The retooling has already been done. The supply chain is up and running again. My concern is for the future. Now, with rare earth metals, there's so many places you can get the ore, and the processing is based on technologies from the 1920s. It's really easy to do. There's just a little bit of a lag to set it up. But with semiconductors, not all fab facilities are created equally. The Chinese do the low-end stuff, like a smart spatula. The Koreans, the Taiwanese, and the Americans do the really high-end stuff, the stuff that goes into like your phone. It's that middle ground that's the problem. The middle ground that goes into, say, automotive comes from Thailand and Malaysia. Now, the Biden administration is putting tens of billions of dollars behind a program to bring semiconductor manufacturing back to the United States. But he's not going after the stuff that's in Thailand And he's not going after the stuff that's in Malaysia. He's going after the stuff that Americans have the quality advantage. That's the high end. That's competing with Taiwan, Korea, and Japan. That's not where the shortage is. Also, when people say, bring semiconductor manufacturing back from China, no, that's not the stuff we want. That's the low-end stuff. That's the stuff you would subcontract out anyway. And besides, most of it's not designed in China. It's designed here. Most of the stuff that's designed, or that goes into automotive in Thailand and Malaysia is designed here. And a good portion of the stuff that goes into the Taiwanese semiconductors, which are some of the best in the world, are designed here. Bringing this all under a new manufacturing umbrella is not something you do in 6 months or 9 months or 12 months or 24 months or 36 months. So if I'm right about the future of the global trading system, and it really does break down, the United States is going to have to do one of two things. Number one, it'll have to go down market with semiconductors, and that means building a lot of $10 billion fabs as quickly as possible, and as quickly as possible is probably 2 years. That's a long time to go without automation in automotive. Option number two, the United States might not care about the world anymore, but we're probably going to care very much about Southeast Asia.